Continuing our investigation into financial mismanagement allegations at Community Action Duluth. Tonight, we're learning more about the chaotic way Classy Dudley's tenure at the organization began.
A 2022 state report said a former board member violated her role by overriding the board with friendships and personal preferences to hire Dudley as an executive director. The report would ultimately call many complaints frivolous, but labeled CAD a, quote, chaotic organization.
On November 20th of this year, union staff stood in front of CAD holding a news conference to voice their concerns. They alleged financial mismanagement, sexual harassment, and more.
Yeah, now nearly a month since, they're speaking out again, feeling like little progress has been made. Northern News Now's Kyrie Johnson is live tonight outside CAD after hearing exclusively from staff members today. And Kyrie, it can't be easy to work there after publicly making those allegations.
Yeah, Laura and Dan, that's right. These union staff are growing increasingly frustrated over the lack of communication, and many of them are feeling like it's now time to take things a step further by stepping away entirely.
For me, when I think about Community Action's silence to its employees, we're doing a disservice to the community, and that's unfortunate.
Employees say months of pleas for better communication at CAD have gone unanswered. Without outreach, staff members like Sasha Choparov say they're being driven away.
Unethically diminishing that faith and that trust, and it pays dividends. I mean, there are people leaving left and right. There's absolutely no spark in what Community Action used to be.
A letter was recently sent to the board chair, Salam Witherspoon, requesting a meeting with union staff, saying the lack of communication has eroded our confidence in the board's willingness to properly address the concerns and complaints employees have raised. We do not believe that you will protect us from further retaliation. These workers say the fear has left many employees with no option left but to walk away from jobs they loved.
In the last month and a half, we have lost 6 staff members. 3 of those being manager level positions and 3 of those being union members.
These employees told me despite the news of CAD bringing in a third-party investigator, many staff members have declined to participate.
All of the staff have chosen not to participate in interviews yet until we get some sort of assurance from the board about the scope of the investigation and how the results will be shared.
CAD was listed as an at-risk agency in 2022, mid-risk in 2023, and in August reports said things seem to be on the right track, but CAD needs to improve their communication. A police staff have felt they've been yelling into a void for months.
Employees' mental health comes from lack of communication. If we don't know and we're working in uncertainty, that not only affects the work that we do with our communities, but it affects our families and ultimately affects us.
I did attempt to get in contact with Executive Director Classy Dudley today to talk about some of these staff concerns. I did not get a response, as has been the case for about a month now. Live in Duluth, Kyrie Johnson, Northern News Now.